Now what I'm going to do is create a sales chart dynamic web form page that will simulate getting the report server and folder name from a repository and let the user select which report they'd like to see from a drop-down list. This will demonstrate how you can set the report server URL and report path properties of the report viewer controlled dynamically. Alright, so here I am in Visual Studio. I have the report server viewer project open, something I created previously. And I'm just going to add a page to this. I'm not going to have any dependency on the previous page that I added to this report. Alright, so I'll come over here to Solution Explorer, and I'm going to add another web form to the page. Select Add and Web Form, and I'm going to call this Sales Chart Dynamic. Alright, and there's the file. I'll go over to Design View. And now I need to add some user interface elements. So the first thing I'm going to do is make sure that the cursor is within the body of the report and come over here to the toolbox, select the Standard section, and add a label. And this is going to be the report header. Now I'll hit Return, and now I'm going to insert a table. Right there. And I'm going to need 3 rows and 2 columns, because this is going to hold the label and text box or other control that I'm going to use to prompt the user for information. And I want it to just float in size, and I'll click on OK, and there I have the table. I kind of barely see it there, but it'll become more evident as I add controls to that table. Alright, first thing I'm going to do is add a label control to each of the cells in the left column. There's the first one. Notice that as soon as I add the first label, it widens the entire column, and so it makes it easier to select different ones. Select the label there, and put a label there. Okay, so I've got 3 labels at this point. Now I'm going to add text box controls to the right column of the first 2 rows. So do the same process here. Text box, add another one there, and text box. Okay. Now I'm going to give these specific names because I need to access these in code. So I'll come over here to Properties and scroll down here to Name, the ID, and I'm going to call the first one Report Server URL, because that's going to have the report server URL. And I'll name the second one Report Folder Text. And I want to follow my own convention. Come back over here to that first one. Change the name slightly. I want to add text to the end, just as a convenience to tell when I'm working with the name programmatically what kind of control it is. Alright, in this third row, I want to add a drop-down list. Double-click there, and I'm going to name that as well. I'm going to call that Report Name List. Because again, I'm going to need to access that item within code. Okay, so I'm done with the table. So now I'm going to come down here, outside of the table itself, and actually just select outside here. Actually, nope. Always forget how to select below an item. Well, I'll go to the source and do it like this. And I'll clean up that afterwards. Save my changes, go back over to design, and now I can add controls below the table. Designer is a little bit weird. All right, I'm going to add a button. And I'm going to change the text on the button to display report. And I need to change the name of it, so I'll change the ID to report button. All right, then the last thing I need to do is add text for the labels. So I'll select each label, come down here and change the text property. So this is a report header. So I'm going to call this report viewer programming example. And I'll also add a return after that. And then I'll change this first label to report server URL and a colon. Change the second label to say report folder. Whoops, that's the ID. Oh, I don't have it selected properly. There we go. Now I can change the text. Report folder. And select the last one. And set the text for this to report name. Okay, so there's our user interface. Not the most beautiful. In a real application, of course, I would add some pretty CSS, format this nicely, make it a lot more dynamic, whatever makes sense for the particular application. But once again, this is not a user interface design course, so I'm not going to spend any more time on that. All right, so next thing I need to do is add a script manager, because that's required by the report viewer. So I'll once again double click there, and that adds it to the report. And now it's finally time to add the report viewer. So I'll double click there, and now I have the report viewer on the page. So the first thing I'm going to do is widen this a bit, once again to about roughly 700 pixels wide, something like that. And then I'm going to change the name of the control to View Report. And again, I'm changing the name because I'm going to access this report in code, because I need to change its properties dynamically at runtime. All right, I'll come back over to the report viewer. And because I'm again going to display a server report, I need to select that, set the report server URL, and then the path. And you'll see that there's a default value for the report server URL. It turns out that that is required, even though I may or may not use that value in my application. If I change that or delete what's in there and just leave an empty box, which results in a null URL, then I'll get a compile time error. So I have to have a placeholder there. It has to be a valid URL. But I'm going to change that in code. The report path doesn't need to be set. So I'm also going to change that in code, so I'm not going to enter a value there. Okay, so that's all I need to do there within the tasks pane. All right, now it's time to start adding some code. So I'm going to double click on the form outside of any controls, and that opens up the code behind page, and that creates the load event for the page. So what I need to do here is set the initial value of the report server URL and the report folder. All right, now I only need to do this if it's not a postback. This code only needs to execute when the page first loads. So I'm going to do an if statement, and if it's not page is postback, so the first thing I need to do is set the report server URL text, the text property of that control, to http://localhost/report server. And again, that identifies the location, the instance of reporting services that I want to access. And then I also need to specify the report folder, and that's going to be sample reports. Now in a real application, I might hit a configuration file, a database, an XML file someplace, ask the user, whatever, for those values. But here I'm simulating that and just setting it to a static text. Now the next thing I need to do is add some items to that drop-down list box. Once again, in a real application, I probably hit the reporting services server, find out what reports are available in the specified folder, and dynamically create that. I want to keep things simple, so I'm just going to add static values. So I'm going to use report name list, items, add. First one is company orders. Copy a bit. Second one is drill down. Third one is reseller cumulative sales. And the last one is sales chart. And hopefully I spelled all those correctly. And I'll save my work, hit Control S. All right, I'll go back to the designer and double-click on the display report to create the click event procedure for report button. Just a quick and easy way to add the event handler and hook it up. So what this code is going to do is it's going to set values of the report viewer control for both the server location and the path that the user wants. Okay? So this is fairly simple code. I'm going to use the view report. Remember, that's the name that I gave that control, the report viewer. I need to go into the server report section and set the report server URL. And I'm going to set that equal to a new URI. I can't just set it to a string value. It has to be a URI object. So I'm going to new up a URI. Fortunately, that's a system object, so I don't need to add any additional usings or references or anything like that. And I'm going to use the report server URL text and the text value of that and create that new URI and assign that to the report server URL. So now the report viewer is going to know which instance of a reporting server to hit for this particular report. Then I need to set the report path. So I'm going to do basically the same thing. Server report, and this is a report path, and that I just set to a string, and I need to build the path, so I'm going to use the report folder .text and concatenate on / and concatenate on the user selection from that drop-down list. So report name list and the selected value. And I'll save my changes. All right, so to recap, when the page loads, I set some of the user interface stuff, get it set up for the user, and then here's where I'm programming the report viewer dynamically at runtime. The user clicks a button, it takes the selections and builds that or assigns the properties of the view report control in order to display the report. All right, so I'll go ahead and run this. All right, so there we have the local host. I need to widen that text box a little bit. I have the list of reports. So let's display the sales chart. I'll display the report, and there's the report. Now, an interesting thing about using the web report viewer control is that you don't have to explicitly refresh the report or create the report or anything like that. Because what happens is that if the report viewer control, when the page is created on the server, has all the information that it needs to display the report, it just goes ahead and displays it. So if we go back into the code behind the page, right here, this is the code for when the user clicks the button. All I had to do was set the properties of the report. I didn't have to refresh the report or create it. That's because ASP.NET generates the page, renders the control, the logic in the control sees that it has all the information it needs to render a report, and so it goes ahead and renders it. That's not the case with the Windows Forms version of a report viewer. So just be aware of that little distinction between the two forms of the report viewer controls.